Hey everybody. Okay, so we are starting World War II. This is the final unit of my class, which is so hard to believe. I can't believe we are here and that we've made it through this crazy school year. And honestly, we are still sitting in the classroom, or obviously those of you at home are not. But I mean, it's just crazy for me that we've actually made it. So yay for us! 3 more Mondays, and then summer, here we come. So, but we, have a really interesting, action-packed, to say the least, unit to finish on for the school year, and that is, of course, World War II and the Holocaust. So let's just jump right in. We're going to do actually lessons 1 and 2 today. And that's the same as what we're doing in class. So, I mean, if in class, I may have a class here and there that didn't quite get to the Stalin video, but I mean, that's about it. So we're getting through 1 and 2 today. So the great thing about lessons or unit 12 and 13 is 13 seriously just picks up right there where we left off on 12, which should help hopefully, your understanding and timeline and periodization. And a lot of students do really well actually on the final unit because, I mean, it's World War II and the Holocaust, but also because, again, like they have a really solid understanding of the conflict because so much of it is similar and, again, feeds off of that World War I conflict. So instability after World War I, of course, is created by the Treaty of Versailles. Okay, the war guilt clause, that made Germany pay reparations that were completely unrealistic, caused Germany to fall into an economic tailspin. And, again, pat on the back. As Americans, we don't sign the Treaty of Versailles. Our Congress actually refuses to ratify it because we just think it's total crap, because it was ridiculous. And we saw the writing on the wall and saw how unrealistic it was. So, but because of that, because we choose not to ratify the treaty, we do not get to join the League of Nations. Okay. And the League of Nations, of course, if you'll remember, was Woodrow Wilson's, big baby out of the Paris Peace Conference. That was like the one thing out of his 14 points that he would not let go of. And then, unfortunately, again, we don't even get to join it. One of the things I want you to kind of keep tucked into the back of your brain is the fact that the League of Nations is not going to be very successful as a peacekeeping organization, in large part because people are excluded from it, like not just the United States because we didn't ratify, but because of Germany, who's not allowed. People can, countries can refuse, can say, we're going to leave the League of Nations. We don't like this anymore. We don't want to be a part of it. And there's no consequences. And that's the next thing. You'll notice when we get to Japan and their movement into China, specifically into Manchuria in the beginning of the 30s, and that kind of marks the road to war in the Pacific in a lot of ways. The League of Nations is going to come in and say, hey, don't do that. And Japan says, what are you going to do about it? And the League of Nations just kind of stares at them like, we're going to tell you we don't like it. And that's about all that they can do. There's no, there's no bite to their bark. And so anyways, long story longer is the League of Nations is going to prove very ineffective. So with that being said, let's look, though, at Germany. Germany's instability after World War I, of course, is no big shock. You had, again, a completely unrealistic expectation placed on a nation afterwards. And to their credit, they do make their first reparations payment in full in 1921. However, after they make their first reparations payment in full, it pretty much bankrupts them, right? Like then after that, they have no money left. And the thing is, my students today have been like, well, why didn't they just go out there and like start making some more money? Well, okay, they printed money. That's very different from making money. All of the money that they could have made off of their mines, off of their agriculture, off of their colonies, all of those things had been taken away from them. And so their ability to truly produce at the level that they needed to in order to make these payments had been stripped from them. And so that their solution, unfortunately, again, is just to print money. And so, the inflation is going to become absolutely outrageous. The inflation in Germany in the 1920s is historic. I mean, seriously, it's the worst, one of the worst inflation stories of all time. And so, to give you an understanding and an example of that, in 1914, the ratio of German marks to US dollars was 4.2 German marks to $1. Not the greatest exchange rate, not the worst. 1923 rolls around, the ratio of German marks to US dollars is 4.2 trillion to 1. There was so much money in circulation in Germany that they would have what were called the bread runs of Germany. And so people would want to get paid, if they still had a job, they would want to get paid at their lunch break, because the price of bread, because inflation was so bad that the price of bread would sincerely go up from in the morning to in the afternoon. And so they'd want to get paid at lunch so they could run down the street to the bakery and buy their bread at the morning prices. But they would sincerely have to take several suitcases or sometimes even wheelbarrows to work with them, so that when they did get paid, because there was just, again, the money was so worthless and there was so much of it in circulation, that they would have to literally put all the money in these wheelbarrows or in these suitcases in order to get it down to the bakery. And sometimes even the suitcases and wheelbarrows full of money still wouldn't pay for one loaf of bread. I mean, so this is one of, if that tells you anything, it's just nuts. I mean, the inflation rate was just crazy. So, and again, their money was so worthless. Here's another example. People would wallpaper their homes with the money. They would use it as kindling. There's even pictures where they would rubber band money together for their kids to play with it as blocks, because that's how just worthless it was. There's also a story I read one time where there were several suitcases of money just left on the street by somebody. And I think it was actually a case of suicide. And they just their suitcases of money were left on the street. And people who stole the suitcases emptied the suitcases out of the money and just took the suitcases because that's how worthless the money was. So Germany in the 1920s is just in a really, really bad place. And this is just a quick little video kind of talking about that. So France, Great Britain, a lot of the surrounding European states are honestly suffering because Germany is suffering. I mean, you have to think Germany was a huge part of the economic puzzle of Europe. This was a highly industrialized, very financially sound country prior to World War I. And so a lot of, what they were bringing to the table affected other states around it because, everything works together. I mean, at this point in time, a globalized economy very much exists. And so again, you take that big of a piece out of the puzzle and it's going to affect people. So hang on just a second. What do you need? This. Okay, go. Sorry. So this is where you can't help but just shake your head at specifically kind of France and Great Britain, because they start to go, oh my gosh, we are banking on Germany to make these reparations payments in order to also help out our economy after the war. And Germany can't make these reparations payments. So I guess we need to figure out some kind of way to help Germany out financially. I mean, really. Of course, if I were, Woodrow Wilson has got to just be to like lose his mind. I mean, because of course, this is what he and just, America in general, by not ratifying the Treaty of Versailles, was trying to say all along, like, hello, yes, we knew this was going to happen. But anyways, an international commission is created in August of 1924 to like help out Germany in their financial woes that were created by most of the people on the International Commission to help them out. So they reduced the reparations payments from 2.5 billion annually to 2 billion annually, because they've been making their payments so well since 1921 anyway. That's really a good job, guys. They don't give them any of the opportunities back to make money in August of 1924. But the United States enacts what becomes known as the Dawes Plan. And this is, the United States in the 1920s is experiencing the roaring 20s. We're living on a massive financial high after World War I. It is huge economic boom, huge cultural boom in the United States. And so the US is like, we've got the money. And so we loan Germany 2.5 billion. The plan, if it had gone the way that it was supposed to, would have ended up in about 5 years putting $1 billion in interest back in America's pocket, which is, that's a pretty good return on a loan, making $1 billion in 5-6 years. So the point of the 2.5 billion is to give it to Germany. They can then make that $2 billion reparations payment that they need to make to the Allies. And that puts $500 million left over into the German economy to try to kickstart it and get them back to like a level playing field. So everybody's good. Everybody can kind of get back to where we were pre-World War I and come up overall economically. Everybody wins if that happens, was the viewpoint. $500 million wasn't going to kickstart the German economy at this point. I mean, it was like putting a Band-Aid on like a bleeding artery. I mean, like it just doesn't, it was not going to work. It's or throwing like a penny into a wishing well. You're not going to see that penny again. And so the problem is that, again, stock market spectators in the United States especially are looking at this, though, and kind of banking on Europe coming back because of it, like coming back up to, an economic scale that everybody was used to from Europe, again, prior to World War I. So speculators and stockbrokers are telling Americans, buy. These investments will come back, tenfold once everything stabilizes over there. It doesn't stabilize. And so you end up with the Wall Street stock market crash on October 29th, 1929. Okay. And this is the start of the Great Depression. And so many of my students, because y'all haven't had U.S. history yet, that portion of it, you've only had the beginning portions of U.S. history. A lot of students think, oh, the Great Depression, that's a U.S. history thing. No, the Great Depression affected the world, okay? The world went into a depression. The United States was arguably, hit the hardest, and a lot of it had to do with our prosperity in the 20s. We had so much disposable income that we pumped so much money into the stock market instead of kind of being more cautious and holding back, that when the stock market crashed, yes, we lost everything. People lost everything. Whereas the countries that weren't having as massive of a financial and economic high as we were in the 1920s were a little bit more cautious because they didn't have as much disposable income. And later during the Depression, that actually bodes in their favor. So Anyways, by 1932, you have the worst year of the Depression. In Britain, you have a 25% unemployment rate. In Germany, you have a 30% unemployment rate. In the United States, you have like a 33, 34% unemployment rate. So, I mean, things were really bad. Homeless, of course, fill the streets. People lose their homes, their jobs, their vehicles. I mean, they lose everything. And, governments don't really know what to do. And of course, people are looking to the government because, hello, it's a time of crisis. Like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And this is why during World War II, I kind of honed in on that total war component of it, because I want you guys to understand that, when you have a time of crisis and you start to ask the government, what are you going to do to like fix my issues, my problems, that gives the government more power over your life. And so, and again, when you are in almost a global depression, global crisis, I mean, again, all of these governments are going to get a lot more power because collectively, that's what everybody is screaming. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And unfortunately, in Europe, of course, this leads them towards fascist dictators like Mussolini and like Hitler. And it's because the people there, the European people, didn't have a massive amount of trust in democracy. Many of these countries were newly democratic. It hadn't gone all that well for them. And so they resorted back to trusting a one-man show because culturally and historically, that's what they knew. That's what they were comfortable with. They were used to these autocratic leaders, kings, monarchs. Okay. And so, trusting in one person wasn't some kind of like foreign concept to them like it would be to Americans, because we are so like embedded and trusted in, and we trust the democratic process that, that's not what we were looking for. We knew like, okay, we don't really like the current president. We'll vote in a new one. And that's exactly what we did. So Herbert Hoover was our president at the start of the Great Depression. And so you can't see the picture really well behind me, but when everybody becomes, not everybody, but a large portion of the American population become homeless, these like shack villages spring up all around these cities, throughout the United States, and they get nicknamed Hoovervilles because of Herbert Hoover. So he is voted out, and who gets voted in is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR. And he will be our president from 1930 to his death in 1945. And if you're like, that's 15 years, there's supposed to be term limits. There's term limits because of FDR. He, of course, is our president throughout the Great Depression and then almost all of World War II. And he is going to say no man should have this job like more than twice. It's too much. And in his defense, he definitely dealt with a lot. And so that is honestly why we have a 2-term limit on the presidency. And anyways, FDR is going to come to the table. And we talked about this as well during World War I. Even capitalist-based countries during a crisis tend to become more socialist because, again, people want the government to come in with solutions and solve their problems. And so therefore, if it's a financial crisis, you're giving, again, the government more power in terms of means of production. And so the New Deal was FDR's big reform package to try and, get America rolling again and get people back to work. And so, you have the Tennessee Valley Authority, the, public works projects, but the deal is that it's the government that's funding all of these, all of these infrastructure projects. And yes, it's getting people back to work, but it's via government funding. And so this is the point in time in U.S. history where we become this kind of odd mixture of capitalism and socialism. And, a lot of the New Deal reforms, of course, were supposed to be temporary. They were supposed to be, only until the United States got themselves out of the Depression. And that hasn't been the case. A lot of the New Deal reforms are still very much a part of the American culture and society and expectation. Very, like Social Security. Social Security was part of the New Deal package. And so again, like some of these programs that were meant to be temporary are not. And again, like that's kind of why we are this weird mixture of the two economic systems. But as I said, unfortunately in Europe, people move to these highly charismatic dictators who feed off of the middle class's fear of communism, okay, and of socialism, and who don't trust the democratic process and are scared to death that these communist parties are going to be voted in. And so they kind of are like, you know what, I would rather go with this one man show than a communist party. And so if you'll look at this map, by 1938, everything in purple is a dictatorship. The pink is democracies dismantled by dictatorships, aka Hitler, between 1938 and 1940. So the majority of Europe by 1940 is being ran by a dictator and is under a totalitarian state, which means that everything, like the political, economic, social, intellectual, and cultural lives of the people are all being determined by the person in charge. Okay, in Italy, this is going to be Mussolini. Of course, in most of Europe by 1940, this is going to be Hitler. In Spain, it's going to be General Francisco Franco. And of course, in the Soviet Union, you have Joseph Stalin. So, you've got every ounce of people's lives being dictated to them. And if you're kind of like, why would anybody go for that? Well, again, they are in a state of complete crisis. Okay. And when people are financially really struggling, when people are broke, that is when they start to really, truly panic. When you can't put food on the table for your family, you have people starving, you're homeless, and you have somebody stand up on a stage that speaks right to all of your fears and all of your frustrations and gives you a simple solution to all of these complex problems that you have no idea how to solve, they're going to immediately endear themselves to you. And that's the thing. It's not like these men came out on stage like Mussolini and like Hitler and were like, we're going to kill all of these people ruthlessly. That was not what they led with, guys. That happened after they secured power. Okay, when they were trying to rise up in the political arena, everything was unicorns and rainbows and we're going to fix all of your problems. And Hitler took obviously a huge page out of the World War I playbook with the use of propaganda. He utilizes propaganda brilliantly throughout the 1930s during his kind of rise to power in Germany, and endeared himself to the German people even more. And again, they're standing up on stage. Let's just specifically talk about Mussolini. He comes onto the scene in Italy in the 20s, and Italy was a newly unified country that you have to think they had only been unified since 1871. And they don't quite trust just yet in democracy. They don't feel as if they've reached this greatness that everybody is wanting to feel. World War I was a huge disappointment. The end of World War I is definitely affecting them and creating instability. And so they're looking for somebody to say, again, all of those rainbow and unicorn statements that give them a good feeling again, and for once in a very long time. And Mussolini he's like the quintessential Italian. Like, he gets up there and, flails his arms around and is very charismatic and passionate when he's talking. And, he's talking about this greater Italy and and saying all of these amazing things that, again, as an Italian, you're like, yeah, this sounds awesome. And again, he's a capitalist. He's not a communist because we don't want communism. And he just feeds in at the perfect moment to this huge platform of people in Italy that again have a systemic cultural trust in a one-man show. And so, Mussolini is going to become Italy's fascist dictator and a big buddy to Hitler. Hitler is actually going to look up to Mussolini in a huge way. For example, and this is not any type of spoiler alert, y'all know we win World War II. Whenever the Eagle's Nest, which was Hitler's, big compound home fortress up in the Austrian Alps, whenever our troops, the U.S. troops, get to Austria and get up to the Eagle's Nest, they find these scrapbooks in Hitler's, again, personal home, full of like newspaper clippings of Mussolini from the 20s and 30s. They find photo albums of just Hitler and Mussolini. He had like a straight up like man crush fanboy thing going on. And if you watch Mussolini's speeches and the way like he pumps his fist and like, and again, his charisma and his passionate speaking and all of that. And then you go and you watch a lot of Hitler's speeches. There's a lot of similarities there. And it's because, again, Hitler looked up to and admired Mussolini and did and copied a lot of the things that he did. So Mussolini is a pretty important factor in all of this. This is a good video to watch about him. And you can't talk about, fascist dictators without talking about Joseph Stalin. Seriously, one of the most evil dudes in all of history. And again, I'm not trying to give credit at all to Hitler. Both he and Stalin are commiserating together in the worst, most inner circles of hell. But I'm telling you, if I had to choose between like Hitler and Stalin, I would choose Hitler. I know that sounds awful. I would choose neither one of them. Both of them need to just, rot in hell, which is what they're doing. But I'm telling you, Stalin is awful. And I'll explain why here in a minute. If you're kind of like, you got to back this up for me, Miss Latham. I'm getting there. So we ended talking about Russia in the last unit with, civil war breaks out after the revolution happens. And the Red Army wins. Okay. The Red Army was, of course, Lenin and his Bolsheviks. This happens in 1922. You end up with the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR, or the Soviet Union. Lenin, however, is going to die really quickly. He dies in 1924, and this creates this huge power vacuum, right? So who's going to take Lenin's spot? Well, these two guys show up to vie for that position, Leon Trotsky and Joseph Stalin. Okay. Very quickly, Stalin is going to, show that he is willing to do just about anything to gain that power, in the fact that he starts killing off every single political rival that he's got. Okay. Trotsky realizes very quickly he's got to get out of the Soviet Union because there is, a bullet with his name on it. Or unfortunately, by 1940, in his case, there's an ice pick with his name on it. But, Stalin, he starts taking out every single person that he deems to be a political threat that's in his way. If this tells you anything about Stalin, he will have what actually becomes the KGB track Trotsky for 12 to 13 years. And when they finally find him in Mexico, again, they take an ice pick to his head and kill him. But he had been on the run from Stalin for over a decade, and Stalin was still determined to hunt his butt down and get rid of him, as And so Stalin, by the late 20s, early 30s, has secured complete power in the Soviet Union through just death and fear. And he is going to launch his 5-year plan. So his 5-year plan is basically saying, okay, we all know that Russia is a solid 100 years behind, especially industrially. So in 5 years, we are going to go from pretty much a dominantly agricultural economy to industrial. And we're not just going to be industrial, we are going to be like one of the top industrial nations of the world. Because that can totally happen in 5 years. It shouldn't be a problem. Everybody get on board. Everybody good to go? Awesome. It's going to kill 6 million people because it's going to create a man-made famine. Okay, the second worst, actually, man-made famine in history. The only one that tops him is Mao Zedong in China in the 50s. And I mean, come on, Mao sucks. So here's the deal. He moves so much of course, the country's resources into industrialization. And so there's no food. Stalin doesn't care. And if you spoke out against the 5-year plan, against him, against anything that he was doing, you were dead. Or you were sent to the Soviet gulags, which were labor camps in Siberia. These labor camps were a death sentence all on their own. They were out in Siberia that you had, barely any food. You weren't provided any type of real shelter, clothing. I mean, it was just a slow death is all the gulag was. And I mean, he didn't care. He killed, this is prior to World War II, guys. This is prior to World War II. He kills like 15 million of his own people. I think after World War II, when it was all said and done, like between the 5-year plan and World War II, like 30 million Russians are going to be dead. Many of them because of Stalin, not because necessarily of even the war or enemies. It's because of Stalin. And I mean, he is awful. He has no soul. And I mean, again, neither does Hitler. That's the reason why I'm saying, like, you have to understand, I don't want to pick either one of them, but I actually had a student ask me today, like, who would you choose? And I was like, oh my gosh, I know this sounds terrible, but I choose Hitler. Because at least Hitler, if he deemed you worthy, like if you were Aryan and you were German, he did like love you and try to take care of you and wanted you to prosper. Stalin didn't care about anybody. I mean, not even his own kid, for example. I mean, like, he doesn't care. You get in his way, you are deemed, and the dude was paranoid, so anybody around him was a threat. No one was safe. Even if you thought like you were friends with Stalin, like, think again. No one was safe. I mean, like, again, this is a legitimate picture of people about to be hanged in the Soviet Union just because they disagreed or didn't quite do what he wanted them to do during the 5-year plan. As soon as the Great Purge, a lot of people also call the Great Purge like Stalin's reign of terror. And I mean, he is going to kill everybody, all kinds of people. I mean, as it says, army officers, diplomats, union officials, intellectuals, just normal people. And the thing is if he deemed you a threat, he didn't just kill you. He killed your whole family, your kids, your wife, babies. I mean, like, he didn't care. It's going to be the same during World War II. Like, he's going to tell his snipers regularly to, like, shoot kids. I mean, it's because, yeah, I mean, anyways, we'll talk about that at the Battle of Stalingrad. But I mean, he has no heart, no soul. Neither does Hitler, again. But, oof. So Stalin is truly one of the worst villains of world history. And, did just horrific things once he gained power in the Soviet Union. Now, again, he doesn't gain it necessarily because people are looking to him to solve their problems. He gains it through killing people and fear. So that separates him obviously from Mussolini and Hitler. Lenin had kind of already gotten the Bolsheviks in power, and he was able to ride off of those coattails and then, build his own platform on the bodies of everybody that he deemed, again, a threat. So, all right, so this is a video about Stalin. It's just real quick. We'll circle back to him again. Don't worry. And if you know, of course, that the Soviet Union is our ally, is going to end up being the United States and Great Britain's ally during World War II, and you're like, oh my God, how in the world did we become allies with this dude? It's the age-old, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. We never got along with Stalin. I mean, we never liked the guy. It was a case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And, we don't have a Cold War that lasts from 1947 to 1991 for no reason. So, all right, that is it. Tomorrow is going to be Hitler and Nazi Germany. It will probably bleed into Thursday a little bit. But those are lessons 1 and 2 of Unit 13, our final unit over World War II and the Holocaust. Y'all have a great Tuesday, and I will see you tomorrow.